The research documented the heat retention properties, structural integrity over decades of use, and environmental integration that contemporary building methods struggled to match. Thermal imaging studies revealed how earth-sheltered construction worked with natural systems, rather than trying to impose artificial heating solutions on hostile environments. Thornton's own reflection, recorded in a 1923 interview when he was 68 years old, captured the fundamental lesson that extended far beyond mining camp survival. Wasn't about being smarter than other miners, he explained to the Montana Pioneer History Project. Was about listening to people who'd survived Montana winters for centuries before we got here. Blackfoot didn't build tree pits because they were primitive. They built them because they worked. That statement summarized a principle that would influence modern earth-sheltered building, passive solar design, and thermal mass applications throughout the 20th century. Between 1889 and 1920, documented records showed that tree pit shelters saved 47 lives in Montana mining camps, prevented countless cases of cold weather injury and hypothermia, and established construction techniques that influenced frontier building practices throughout the northern Rockies. The legacy extended beyond immediate survival benefits to demonstrate how traditional knowledge systems, often dismissed as primitive by conventional wisdom, often contained sophisticated solutions refined through generations of practical testing under genuine survival conditions. Tobacco Root Mountains, Montana Territory, 1889. While 23 seasoned miners were hustling to finish building their 12 by 14 feet log cabins before winter slammed into high gear, Jack Thornton rolled in on November 8, a solid 47 days after any sensible prospector would have buttoned up the chinks in their walls. The community didn't pull any punches. The judgment came down fast and hard. Jim Morrison, a 3-year veteran, straight up called it suicide. Everyone knew you needed 4 walls and a roof to make it through. But Thornton had something the others were missing: 3 years of know-how picked up from the Lakota and Blackfoot people who'd been acing Montana winters for centuries. Instead of chopping down trees for walls, he started digging into the root system of a monster spruce, carving out a hole 8 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4.5 feet deep. The miners gave him a hard time, calling him a fool and his shelter a grave. They couldn't wrap their heads around why anyone would pick a hole in the ground over a proper cabin. Then December hit, bringing 8 straight days of temperatures between 20 and 35 degrees below zero. Despite burning through his entire winter woodpile, Morrison's cabin only managed to climb to a measly 12 degrees inside. Webb's chinking gave way completely, letting icy air blast through the gaps faster than his fire could heat the place. Sanderson threw in the towel on sleep, feeding the flames every couple of hours just to keep his cabin above freezing. But Thornton's underground hideout stayed at a comfy 50 degrees while he snoozed away the nights, burning only a quarter of the wood his neighbors were going through. What was this prospector's understanding of Earth's thermal properties and indigenous engineering that somehow 3 years on the frontier had taught everyone else to just ignore? If you're into stories about tried-and-true practical wisdom, make sure you subscribe. We've got loads more documented accounts that are worth remembering. Drop a comment with your city and state. We're curious to see where these historical lessons are reaching. The first snow had already dusted the peaks of the Tobacco Root Mountains when Jack Thornton's pack horse gingerly picked its way down the narrow mining trail on November 8, 1889. Trailing behind him were 3 years of seasonal prospecting through Dakota Territory, Wyoming, and Colorado, 3 years that had crammed his head with lessons you couldn't find in any mining manual. Hanging at his side was the tool that would either peg him as seasoned or desperate: a Blackfoot-made digging stick with an iron tip, bartered for tobacco at Fort Benton 3 months earlier, back when most guys were shelling out for axes and saws. 23 miners had already staked their claims along Alder Creek, their cabins in all sorts of states of completion. The familiar sounds of frontier construction filled the valley: the steady chop of axes against pine, the rasp of draw knives peeling bark, and the methodical thump of logs being notched and fitted together. Every man was sticking to the same tried-and-true formula: 12 by 14 foot dimensions, 7 foot walls, pine log construction with mud and grass chinking, a shake roof, and a fireplace smack dab in the middle. The math was simple and universally agreed upon: a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks to build a proper shelter, with winter's deadly chill barging in no more than 3 weeks. Jim Morrison straightened up from his chinking as Thornton's horse moseyed toward the biggest unclaimed plot. Morrison had clocked 3 seasons in Montana territory, building for conventional log cabins, using know-how he'd picked up from Norwegian and German immigrant miners who knew their way around mountain winters. His current cabin represented the sum total of frontier smarts: thick walls, tight chinking, and maximum interior space for stashing wood and kicking back. The sight of a newcomer arriving so late in the game sparked immediate concern mixed with professional scorn. "Any damn fool knows you need 4 walls and a roof," Morrison hollered across the claim line. "The ground will freeze you stiff in 2 nights." His warning carried the weight of experience, backed by the visual proof of his own almost-done structure. His cabin walls were standing 6 logs high, the gaps carefully jammed with clay-rich mud mixed with dried grass, and the shake roof framework was already holding up its first layers of split cedar. That's how civilized folks survived Montana winters, through tried-and-tested methods, decent planning, and respect for the harsh realities of high-altitude cold. Thornton dismounted without a word, his eyes glued to the massive, ancient spruce that lorded over his claim boundary. The tree towered almost 90 feet, its trunk stretching 18 feet around at chest height. More importantly, its root system sprawled 30 feet in every direction, creating a natural drainage system that had kept the soil solid and fairly dry for what he figured was probably 300 years. He strolled the perimeter slowly, reading the land like his Blackfoot guide had taught him, spotting opportunities for winter shelter. "This tree's been keeping warm longer than white men been in Montana," Thornton finally replied, running his hand along the deeply ridged bark. The comment drew a laugh from Pete Sanderson, whose own cabin walls were already chinked and waiting for the roof. Sanderson had come from Minnesota packing solid carpentry skills and 2 seasons of Montana mining under his belt. His construction followed the frontier playbook, using standard log and chinking methods that squeezed the most out of interior space while keeping the structure strong against snow loads. Even Indians used teepees, not holes in the ground, called Charlie Webb from his worksite 200 yards downstream. Webb was wrapping up his second Montana winter, having survived his first in shared digs with more seasoned miners. His current cabin embodied everything he had soaked up about super cold weather construction: thick walls, a fireplace in the middle, and decent ventilation to keep dangerous carbon monoxide from building up. The idea of ditching proven cabin design for anything else struck him as dangerously green. But Thornton had spent the previous winter in a Dakota Territory earth lodge, bunking with a Lakota family when his conventional shelter had crapped out during a February blizzard. That experience had taught him that indigenous engineering was all about centuries of tested solutions, not just primitive methods. Underground construction worked with the land, using Earth's steady temperature below the frost line, the thermal mass of living wood, and the insulating powers of snow, instead of butting heads with the environment through brute force and guzzling fuel. The core difference was fundamental. Conventional frontier wisdom demanded maximum interior volume for stashing wood, whipping up grub, and just plain living. Too many families had bought the farm in cabins too small to stash enough fuel. Morrison's design put that lesson first, carving out enough interior space to stack 8 cords of split pine, the calculated minimum to make it through winter alive. His central fireplace, hugging the outside wall, stretched floor space while spreading the heat around pretty well. Thornton's alternative played up thermal efficiency over volume. His Blackfoot guide had broken down the math during their tobacco-scented chats at Fort Benton. Earth temperature below the frost line stayed steady at 45 degrees all year round. Living tree trunks were like thermal batteries, soaking up heat during the day and trickling it out at night. Root systems created natural drainage, dodging the moisture headaches that plagued conventional cabins. Small spaces heated up fast and held onto that warmth longer, needing way less fuel to stay livable. "You're digging your own grave, fool," Morrison yelled as Thornton started marking the dig perimeter with his iron-tipped digging stick. The measurements spelled out the depth of Thornton's plan: 8 feet long to give him enough room to sleep and stash his gear, 6 feet wide to weave between the big roots without messing with the tree's strength, and 4.5 feet deep at the center, tapering to 3 feet at the tree trunk end, where the monster spruce would serve as one whole wall. The other miners stopped what they were doing to watch this apparent suicide mission unfold. Webb put down his draw knife, genuinely freaked that he was watching a man's mind crack under pressure. Sanderson bailed on his roof work to get a closer look at what looked like funeral prep. Even Morrison stopped chinking to stare across the claim line, torn between the responsibility to help a fellow miner and total bewilderment at methods that thumbed their nose at every rule of frontier survival. Thornton ignored their commentary, just zeroed in on the soil under the giant spruce. 2 centuries of decomposed needles had whipped up a naturally insulating duff layer 18 inches thick, underlaid by well-drained sandy loam that didn't show any signs of water pooling or freezing. The tree's root system had been drying this soil for centuries, giving him exactly the solid foundation that conventional cabin builders fought to get through lots of site prep and drainage work. By nightfall, Thornton had dug down 18 inches across the whole 8 by 6 foot perimeter. The work showed how precise his planning had been. Big roots naturally channeled around his chosen dimensions, while smaller roots created air pockets that would give him an extra layer of insulation. Morrison's parting shot for the day carried across the darkening valley. 3 weeks, till killing cold, and you're still playing in the dirt like a kid. November 9th dawned clear and bitter, the first hard frost painting the valley grass silver as Thornton kept digging with systematic precision. His iron-tipped digging stick bit through the duff layer with surprising ease, exposing soil that backed up every calculation his Blackfoot guide had shared during their summer trading sessions. The broken-down spruce needles gave way to sandy loam that crumbled just right in his hands, well-drained earth that showed no signs of water buildup or frost heave damage. Morrison staggered out of his cabin at sunrise, coffee steaming in the frigid air, and found himself drawn to watch the deliberate destruction of what he considered basic survival smarts. Day 2 of the Fool's funeral preparations, he announced loud enough for Webb and Sanderson to hear from their claims. The commentary had turned into a morning routine, a mix of real worry and professional confusion at methods that spat in the face of everything they knew about frontier construction. By noon on November 10th, Thornton had hit 3 and 1/2 feet deep across the whole perimeter, his digging revealing the crucial find that would prove his whole idea was sound. The soil temperature at this depth measured exactly 45 degrees, just like traditional wisdom had promised. Below the frost line, Earth kept a steady temperature no matter what was happening on the surface, creating a natural heat reserve that conventional cabin construction completely overlooked. The monster spruce trunk served as one complete wall that needed no building materials, its bark naturally waterproof after centuries of Montana weather. Sanderson bailed on his roof work completely by the afternoon, his schedule be damned as he watched Thornton map the root system, like an underground blueprint. Big roots channeled water away from the dig naturally, their position creating drainage channels that had been doing their job for 3 centuries. Smaller roots formed air pockets all through the surrounding soil, giving natural insulation that no amount of conventional chinking could match. The trees living would stayed warmer than dead construction lumber, adding thermal mass that would hold onto and release heat through the winter. Even badgers got more sense than that prospector, Webb called from his claim, but his voice didn't carry the same conviction as it had before. The digging revealed engineering smarts that challenged everything they thought they knew about primitive construction methods. Thornton used the root structure as natural shelving for supplies, carving storage nooks into the living wood that gave both organization and extra insulation. Every part of the design worked with the existing natural systems instead of trying to force foreign construction ideas onto unwilling terrain. November 11th brought the roof construction phase, which would put Thornton's understanding of load-bearing and weatherproofing to the test. 4 lodgepole pine logs, each 8 inches across, stretched across the 6-foot width of his dig. These main supports carried the weight of everything above, a calculated load that included piles of snow, secondary structural parts, and multiple insulation layers. The engineering showed traditional knowledge refined through generations of Plains Indian earth lodge building. 47 straight spruce saplings, each 2 to 3 inches across, formed the secondary layer, laid perpendicular to the main supports. Thornton handpicked each sapling, checking for straightness and strength, tossing aside any that showed signs of rot or bugs. The perpendicular placement spread the weight evenly while building the framework for the insulation layers to come. The precision of this old-school technique impressed even Morrison, whose carpentry eye recognized sophisticated load distribution when he saw it. The insulation layer called for 8 inches of spruce bough thatch, with the needles pointing down to shed water, a detail that showed a deep understanding of Montana rainfall patterns. Thornton spent a whole day cutting and positioning boughs, creating overlapping patterns that would channel moisture away from the inside while keeping maximum insulation. The technique mirrored methods he'd seen in Lakota earth lodges, where good thatch positioning was the difference between a dry shelter and a flooded-out mess. 23 sections of spruce bark, each measuring 3 feet by 2 feet, formed the outer weather shield. Thornton harvested these sections from dead trees all through the valley, being careful to pick bark without cracks or gaps that would ruin the waterproofing. The overlapping shingle-style layout gave multiple layers of protection, with each piece angled to shed water downhill while stopping wind from sneaking through. The whole roof system could handle 3 feet of snow depth, about 2,400 pounds of spread-out weight, figured from Montana Territory weather records. Day 4 of watching a man dig his own grave, Morrison muttered, but his daily comment now had a hint of doubt. The roof construction showed engineering know-how that challenged his ideas about good frontier building. Webb had stopped joking altogether, genuinely stumped by building techniques that seemed both primitive and sophisticated. Sanderson openly admitted he was confused, telling Morrison that the roof system showed a better understanding of load distribution than some conventional cabin designs he'd seen buckle under snow. The entrance design showed the most clever part of Thornton's thermal engineering, a 4-foot tunnel angled up from the main chamber to the surface, creating an airlock that would stop heat from escaping while still letting him get in and out. Cold air would settle in the tunnel, while warm air stayed up in the main living space, a principle of physics that conventional cabin construction fought against instead of using it to its advantage. The entrance faced southeast, away from the usual northwest winds, while soaking up as much solar heat as possible during the short winter days. The interior layout reflected months of planning fine-tuned by experience. The sleeping area took up an 18-inch raised platform cut right into the root mass, giving natural insulation below and behind him. The fire pit was just a small, shallow dip lined with creek stones, designed to put out maximum heat instead of flashy flames. Every cubic foot of space pulled double duty, with storage, insulation, structural support, and thermal management all working together as one. November 12th brought the end of the basic structure as the first snowflakes started floating across the valley. A 4-inch vent hole through the roof, off-center to stop downdrafts, would let smoke out while keeping heat loss to a minimum. The technique was lifted from Plains Indian methods that Thornton had studied during his winter with the Lakota family, where good ventilation was the key to avoiding both suffocation and losing too much heat. Morrison called across the claim line one last time as snow started falling in earnest. "Still time to build something that won't kill you, fool." But his voice wasn't as strong as it had been before. The finished structure showed engineering ideas that challenged 3 years of frontier building experience. The blizzard hit without warning on November 16th, turning the Tobacco Root Valley from an autumn mining camp into an Arctic war zone in less than 18 hours. The temperature nosedived 47 degrees between dawn and midnight, dropping from a manageable 23 degrees to a bone-cracking 24 below zero. Wind hit a steady 35 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 60, blasting 28 inches of snow sideways across the exposed mining claims. Even by Montana standards, this was an unusually early and brutal storm, catching the miners with their winter preparations unfinished. Morrison's cabin, which had seemed ready to go just days earlier, immediately showed its weaknesses under the full force of real Arctic conditions. His carefully applied mud and grass chinking started cracking within hours as temperatures plummeted, creating tiny splits that grew into gaps, letting frigid air pour right into the cabin. The fireplace, hugging the outside wall to maximize floor space, couldn't keep up with the thermal demands of constant sub-zero conditions. Despite burning through 8 cords of split pine a week, almost double what he had planned on, the inside temperature barely hit 12 degrees. Webb's cabin fell apart even faster as the storm's full fury exposed fundamental flaws in conventional building. His chinking gave out completely, with gaps opening faster than he could patch them in the howling wind and snow. Cold air blasted through the widening cracks so fast that his fire couldn't heat the place, creating conditions inside that weren't much different from outside. With interior temperatures dropping to 8 degrees even with a fire roaring, Webb abandoned his shelter on the second day of the storm, seeking emergency shelter with Sanderson. Sanderson's cabin, the most well-built conventional structure in the camp, showed the inherent limits of standard frontier building when faced with extreme conditions. His 12 by 14-foot interior, designed to store wood and live comfortably, became a liability under real survival conditions. The high ceiling that felt nice and roomy during mild weather now let all the precious heat rise away from the living area, creating a temperature difference that left the floor at 18 degrees while the ceiling hit 32. The big interior space that had seemed so great during construction now needed crazy amounts of fuel just to stay a little warm. Meanwhile, 40 feet away and 8 feet underground, Thornton's tree pit shelter held onto interior conditions that defied everything they thought they knew about frontier survival. On November 16th, with the outside temperature at 22 below zero, his underground chamber registered 48 degrees. The Earth's steady thermal reserve, dismissed by conventional builders as pointless, proved its worth under real stress. Living tree roots surrounding the dig gave thermal mass that soaked up heat during the brief warming periods and trickled it out during the extended cold snap. The science behind Thornton's success became clear as the storm dragged on. Earth below the frost line kept its 45-degree baseline no matter what happened on the surface, creating a natural heat foundation that conventional above-ground construction could never tap into. The massive spruce trunk stopped heat loss through one whole wall, while its root system gave insulation that manufactured materials couldn't match. Snow buildup, reaching 4 feet deep by the storm's third day, added insulation equal to R-value 15 while cutting heat loss through the roof by 85%. Airflow in the underground shelter followed physics principles that worked with natural thermodynamics instead of trying to fight them. The low entrance created a thermal trap where cold air settled in the access tunnel, while warm air stayed up at sleeping level in the main chamber. This natural system needed no extra energy, while keeping temperature differences that conventional cabins could only get with a roaring fire. Thornton's small fire pit heated the small space quickly and well, needing only 6 to 8 pounds of wood a day, compared to the 150 pounds burned in the standard cabins. By November 20th, the difference between construction methods had become clear and undeniable. Morrison was facing a fuel crisis that threatened his life, having burned through his expected monthly wood supply in just 5 days of extreme cold. Ice formed on his inside walls near the chinking gaps, creating conditions where breath froze and metal tools were too cold to touch without gloves. Sleep became impossible without feeding the fire every 2 hours, leading to exhaustion that made the physical stress of being so cold even worse. Webb's situation had gone from bad to worse. His cabin, with its failing chinking and ruined roof, filled up with snow during the December storms. Even after taking shelter with Sanderson, the shared cabin was pushed beyond its limits, with 2 men fighting for warmth around one fireplace. The overcrowding created new issues: carbon monoxide risk from overusing the heating system, too little oxygen from 2 men breathing in a closed space, and fuel consumption that threatened both of them. Sanderson realized that his fancy cabin design required constant attention, fire maintenance every 2 hours, even through the night, watching the chinking gaps all the time, and fuel use that threatened to burn through his whole winter supply before January even hit. The physical and mental exhaustion of trying to survive in a bad shelter started to wear down all 3 builders. Thornton's routine, meanwhile, showed how efficient it was to work with nature instead of fighting it. He stoked his small fire twice a day, morning and evening, burning only dry wood that heated his space fast. Sleep came easy in 48-degree comfort, without waking up to feed the flames or shiver through the cold. The dry inside allowed him to get things done, sharpening tools, fixing gear, and planning spring mining, while his neighbors were just trying to stay warm enough to survive. On November 28th, As the cold snap entered its second week, Pete Sanderson walked up to Thornton's barely there entrance. Exhaustion from not sleeping and tending the fire had made him ask the question that threatened everything he thought he knew about frontier survival. "How warm you staying in there, Jack?" He called down the tunnel, his voice carrying the weight of a man rethinking his ideas about winter shelter. "Warm enough to work on my tools without gloves," came Thornton's reply from the 51-degree interior. The outside temperature was 18 below zero. December arrived with conditions that would push every survival system to the breaking point. The barometric pressure started dropping on December 10th, bringing the kind of Arctic air that old-timer Montana miners knew could be lethal. By December 12th, temperatures had dropped to 28 below zero and kept falling. What happened next would be known in territorial weather records as the coldest stretch in the Tobacco Root Mountains since 1864, an 8-day siege of killing cold that pushed frontier survival methods past their design limits. The Morrison situation turned desperate fast as their fuel calculations proved wildly off. Jim Morrison had based his wood needs on past winters, figuring that 15 cords would be enough to get them through March. Instead, his cabin's heat loss through bad chinking and weak insulation created fuel demands that burned through his whole winter stash by December 15th. Inside temperatures dropped to 12 degrees even with them burning furniture, mining tools, and even floorboards they ripped up in desperation. The math of survival had turned against him. Every degree of warmth now cost way more fuel than he had to give. Jim Morrison's body started to break down as frostbite hit his toes from sleeping in 15-degree conditions. The injury was more than just pain. Frostbitten feet in December meant gangrene and death before spring medical help arrived. His brother Tom, sharing the bad shelter, showed signs of hypothermia, confused thinking, slurred speech, and the dangerous sleepiness that comes before unconsciousness. The cabin that had seemed so good during construction now worked as little more than a windbreak. Webb's situation went from bad shelter to no shelter. His original cabin, with its ruined chinking and damaged roof, filled up with snow during the December storms. Even after taking refuge with Sanderson, the shared shelter was pushed too far, with two men fighting for warmth around a single fireplace. The crowding created new problems: increased carbon monoxide risk from overusing the heating system, too little oxygen from two men breathing in a closed space, and fuel use that threatened both men's lives. Sanderson found that his the cabin design, under the harsh realities of the Arctic, revealed itself to be a major liability. The 12 by 14 interior, once a comfortable living space in milder weather, now posed an impossible heating problem. Heat would immediately rush to the 7-foot ceiling, leaving the floor, where the men actually slept, barely above freezing. The sheer volume of the cabin demanded an immense amount of fuel just to achieve minimal warmth. The traditional fireplace design only worsened the situation, losing precious heat up the chimney faster than they could burn wood. Sleep devolved into a carefully orchestrated survival tactic. 2 hours of rest followed by the mandatory chore of fire maintenance, repeated endlessly each night. The fuel crisis that gripped all the conventional builders exposed fundamental flaws in their initial calculations. Heating estimates based on typical frontier cabins were shockingly off. Instead of the projected 6 to 8 cords of wood per month, these cabins were devouring an unbelievable 12 to 15 cords during the extreme cold snaps. The numbers simply didn't add up. The miners hadn't chopped nearly enough wood to keep their cabins adequately heated during the prolonged Arctic-like conditions. Driven by desperation, they started burning anything they could find: tools, furniture, even structural components of their own cabins, and, heartbreakingly, personal belongings that represented months of hard-earned wealth. Thornton's measurements from the same period revealed the striking superiority of indigenous thermal engineering. On December 12th, with the outside temperature plummeting to a bone-chilling 22 below zero, his shelter maintained a comfortable 49 degrees. December 15th brought even harsher conditions, with 28 below outside, yet his interior remained a cozy 51 degrees. The absolute worst day, December 18th, saw temperatures plummet to a frigid 35 below zero, but inside his tree pit shelter, it remained a steady 48 degrees. On December 20th, with 31 below outside, he recorded a consistent 50 degrees underground. A technical analysis of Thornton's success uncovered principles that conventional frontier wisdom had foolishly dismissed as primitive superstition. The underground temperature stayed remarkably stable because the earth below the frost line naturally maintained a 45-degree baseline, regardless of the surface conditions, a thermal reservoir that above-ground construction could never tap into. The living spruce trunk provided thermal mass, absorbing heat during the brief warming spells and slowly releasing it when the temperature dropped, effectively creating a natural, fuel-free heating system. The snow insulation, now piled over 4 feet deep, acted as an impenetrable thermal barrier, with insulation values far exceeding anything achievable with conventional construction methods. His fuel consumption numbers highlighted an efficiency that seemed utterly impossible to those building conventional cabins. Thornton used a grand total of 2 cords of wood throughout December, while conventional cabins guzzled 12 to 15 cords in a desperate attempt to maintain barely survivable conditions. The small, underground space heated up quickly with minimal fuel, retained heat for hours without constant attention, and provided comfortable working conditions where productive activity was possible instead of just struggling to survive. He could read by firelight, maintain and sharpen his equipment, and sleep through the entire night without waking up to stoke the fire every few hours. December 18th marked the breaking point for conventional construction. Jim Morrison, facing imminent death from hypothermia and running out of fuel, braved the 35 below conditions to reach Thornton's entrance. This act represented a complete and total rejection of 3 years of frontier building knowledge and professional pride. "Jack, we're in trouble," Morrison called down the entrance tunnel. "Can't keep warm enough to live." The admission carried a weight far beyond the immediate crisis. It was a recognition that the fundamental assumptions about surviving the winter had been proven disastrously wrong under real-world conditions. Thornton emerged from his 48-degree shelter into the 35 below air, demonstrating a temperature difference that was even greater than what Morrison was experiencing between his failing cabin and the outdoors. The visual evidence was undeniable. Thornton worked barehanded for several minutes, while Morrison couldn't even remove his gloves without risking immediate frostbite. The underground shelter dweller showed absolutely no signs of cold stress, moved normally, and looked like a man living in heated comfort, not someone fighting for his life. Thornton's technical explanation encompassed centuries of indigenous engineering, painstakingly refined through generations of winter survival. The Earth's stable temperature provided a natural heat foundation. The thermal mass of living wood efficiently stored and released heat. Snow insulation, combined with proper roof design, eliminated heat loss. The airlock entrance prevented cold air from seeping in while preserving interior warmth. The minimal space heated up quickly and retained its temperature without needing constant fuel. Every element worked together as an integrated system, rather than battling natural thermal dynamics. December 19th brought the community's official surrender to methods they had scorned only weeks earlier. Sanderson formally requested permission to excavate a second tree pit near Thornton's successful design. Webb asked if he could share the existing shelter until he could build his own proper underground quarters. Morrison, his pride finally crushed by the looming threat of death, openly admitted his mistake. "Thought you were digging a grave," he said. "Turns out you were the only one building something that works." The transformation went beyond mere individual survival choices. 3 experienced miners, with decades of combined frontier building knowledge, had faced the utter failure of conventional methods in the face of harsh reality. Traditional indigenous engineering, dismissed as primitive ignorance, had proven superior in every measurable way: fuel efficiency, interior comfort, construction time, material requirements, and, most importantly, ultimate survival effectiveness. The spring thaw in March of 1890 revealed the winter's true cost in stark, undeniable terms, leaving no room for debate about the competing survival strategies. Thornton emerged from his tree pit shelter having actually gained 7 pounds during those brutal months. His physical condition had actually improved thanks to a winter of adequate rest and nutrition in comfortable temperatures. The conventional cabin dwellers, however, told a very different story. Morrison had lost a staggering 26 pounds, Webb 21, and Sanderson 19. Their bodies showed the cumulative effects of months spent battling inadequate heating systems and enduring chronic sleep deprivation. The fuel consumption statistics painted an equally dramatic picture. Thornton had burned a total of 2 cords of wood throughout the entire winter season, while the conventional cabins had consumed between 18 and 24 cords each in their frantic attempts to stay alive. Morrison's final tally included not just firewood, but furniture, floorboards, mining equipment, and even personal belongings, all sacrificed to feed his failing heating system. The economic implications were staggering. Conventional heating had consumed winter fuel supplies worth more than most miners earned in an entire season of successful prospecting. The construction time vindication was equally significant. Thornton's 4-day building period paled in comparison to the 6 to 8 weeks required for conventional cabin construction, representing a 90% reduction in labor investment. Material efficiency statistics were even more dramatic. His tree pit shelter used 90% less lumber than standard cabins, required no purchased materials except basic hand tools, and needed absolutely zero maintenance throughout the entire winter season. Meanwhile, conventional structures required constant chinking repairs, roof patches to prevent snow infiltration, and continuous chimney cleaning to maintain even a semblance of heating efficiency. Sanderson began building his own tree pit shelter in late March, applying the lessons he learned from observing Thornton's successful design throughout the winter. His version measured 10 feet by 8 feet, and he incorporated improved entrance design elements that provided better security while maintaining thermal efficiency. The excavation process revealed the same soil conditions that Thornton had exploited: stable temperatures below the frost line, natural drainage through established root systems, and the insulation properties of decomposed organic matter, things that conventional construction simply couldn't replicate. Webb's innovative approach demonstrated how traditional techniques could be adapted and expanded. His dual-chamber design included a separate workshop area connected to the main living space through a short tunnel, creating specialized zones for different activities while maintaining overall thermal efficiency. The workshop chamber allowed him to continue equipment maintenance and small-scale ore processing throughout the winter months, turning survival time into productive work periods. His entrance system featured a double airlock design that further improved heat retention while also providing emergency exit options. Morrison's complete conversion represented the most dramatic acknowledgement of conventional wisdom's failure. He completely abandoned his partially collapsed cabin, investing 2 weeks in the spring to build a tree pit shelter 40% larger than Thornton's original design. His engineering background helped him refine the structural elements, calculating optimal roof loads, improving drainage systems, and developing more sophisticated ventilation controls. The man who had led the winter's mockery became the technique's most enthusiastic advocate. The summer of 1890 brought validation from unexpected sources, as word of the tree pit method spread through regional mining networks. 12 additional miners arrived at tobacco routes specifically to learn underground shelter techniques before establishing their own claims. These newcomers were experienced prospectors from Nevada, Colorado, and California who knew superior survival technology when they saw the documented proof of its effectiveness. Their presence transformed the valley from an isolated mining camp into an informal training ground for indigenous building methods. Technical documentation became systematic as the miners recorded specific measurements, material requirements, and construction variations for different tree species and soil conditions. Sanderson kept detailed logs of temperature differentials, fuel consumption rates, and structural performance throughout the seasonal weather changes. Webb documented his dual-chamber innovations with precise drawings and material specifications. Morrison contributed engineering analysis of load-bearing calculations and drainage system design principles. The winter of 1890-91 provided the ultimate test of widespread adoption. 18 tree pit shelters operated simultaneously in the Tobacco Route Valley, housing 34 miners who had completely abandoned conventional cabin construction. The results were conclusive: 0 cold weather casualties, compared to the previous year's 3 deaths from hypothermia. Average fuel consumption was reduced by 75%, and construction costs were lowered by 80% through the elimination of purchased lumber requirements. Regional adoption accelerated as the techniques spread to the Beaverhead Mountains, the Gallatin Range, and anywhere else where large trees and suitable soil conditions allowed for underground construction. Logging camps adapted the methods for temporary winter quarters, reducing their operational costs while improving worker survival rates. Trapping cabins throughout the northern Rockies incorporated tree pit principles, extending the viable season for fur harvesting in remote locations. Homesteader families adopted modified versions for emergency shelters and root cellars, providing both food storage and survival backup systems. The Montana Historical Society began preserving detailed records of tree pit construction techniques in 1895, recognizing their significance to regional settlement patterns and the development of survival technology. Museum displays documented the thermal principles, construction methods, and historical impact of indigenous engineering knowledge adapted by frontier miners. Modern archaeological studies conducted in the 1960s confirmed the superior thermal efficiency of abandoned mining camp tree pit sites compared to conventional cabin foundations. Scientific validation arrived through University of Montana engineering studies in 1987, which proved that Thornton's original design achieved R-values equivalent to modern construction, using only 1889 materials and traditional knowledge.